I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Even as I sit here typing, it still feels unreal, like I'm trapped in someone else's twisted nightmare. But this is my life now, every painful detail of it. And yeah, I slept with my wife's sister. Not exactly my proudest moment, but that's where we've ended up. Now, before you start judging, let me make one thing clear. I'm not some deranged lunatic. I've got a decent career going for me, and most people would probably say I'm a pretty level-headed guy. I don't snap easily, but jealousy? That's always been my Achilles heel. It sits there, festering under the surface, waiting to strike when something feels off. If I had listened to that gut feeling sooner, I might have spared myself this nightmare. Let me tell you about her, my wife, the woman who could drive any man to madness. From the moment we crossed paths, she was magnetic. Her looks? Flawless. The kind of beauty you'd see on social media and immediately tap, like without even thinking twice. But it wasn't just her appearance. She had this aura about her, a boldness, a fire that made you want to chase after her, even when every instinct told you to run in the opposite direction. She always had to be in charge, and at first, I found that captivating. Hell, the challenge was half the fun. But after a few years of dealing with her constant need to control everything, that allure wore thin real quick. We first met at a friend's party, one of those random nights where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary. Then, bam, she walks in and commands the entire room. I couldn't take my eyes off her. We clicked instantly, and soon enough, we were practically glued together. A few years later, we tied the knot. That's when things started to change. It wasn't terrible at first, but there were signs. Small, subtle signs that I should have paid more attention to, but I didn't. Her career had always been a bit unstable. She'd hop from one job to the next, never quite settling into anything. She worked in marketing for a while, in some mid-level role at a company that didn't really seem to value her. Then one day, she just quit out of the blue. Said she was sick of working for people who didn't appreciate her. And, like the idiot I backed her decision. I told her to take her time, find something she was passionate about. Turns out that something was Instagram. She had this account. Nothing too serious back then, just the usual stuff. Photos of our vacations, her outfits, the whole vanity show routine. It was harmless, or so I thought. When she quit her job, she dove into it full-time. She started posting more, jumping on every social media trend, sharing every little detail of our lives for the world to see. I figured, what's the harm? It kept her occupied while she figured things out, and it's not like we were struggling financially. I never expected it to take off like it did. Honestly, I thought she'd get bored after a while and move on. But her follower count kept growing. First a few hundred, then thousands, and suddenly tens of thousands of people were obsessing over every picture, every product endorsement, every meaningless caption she posted. When we were out, people started recognizing her, treating her like some minor celebrity. Looking back, I should have seen the writing on the wall. But no, I was an idiot. I even encouraged her to pursue it. I figured if it made her happy, who was I to stand in the way? If it didn't work out, we had plenty of savings to fall back on. What I didn't realize was that this shallow, fake online world would become more important to her than anything else, including me. At first, I was proud of her. She was getting noticed, brands were sending her free stuff, and she even started getting paid for posts. I didn't fully understand the appeal, but I was glad she found something she enjoyed. But the more time she spent glued to her phone, the further she drifted away from me. Every conversation became about her followers, her content, her brand. And don't even get me started on the non-stop selfies. It felt like I was living with a wannabe Kardashian. We started growing apart. Our sex life dwindled to almost nothing. Every time I tried to initiate, she'd brush me off, saying she was too tired or had to get up early for some collab meeting. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that she'd snap out of it and things would go back to normal. But they didn't. Now looking back, I realize how blind I was. I was so focused on being the supportive husband, I didn't see how she was building a life that no longer included me. While I was standing by her side, she was walking away. So yeah, That's how it started. And don't worry, I'll get to the part about her sister soon enough. Trust me, things only go downhill from here. Up to a certain point, her Instagram thing wasn't much to worry about. It was just your typical vanity project. Pictures of our trips, her shopping sprees, endless selfies with that look at me vibe. She had a decent following, but nothing that would pay the bills. Then, out of nowhere, things began to change. And they changed fast. She began mingling with new people, social media influencers and bloggers, the type who live their lives through the lens of a camera, always chasing the next like or follower. She'd go to these so-called networking events, which, as I later figured out, was just a dressed-up way of saying, I'm spending time with other attention-hungry egomaniacs. At first, I didn't think much of it. She insisted they weren't there to boost her page, just to help her learn how to game the algorithms. Honestly, I had no clue how much of that was true, but what was undeniable was the rapid growth of her following. Like someone had flipped a switch. I didn't ask questions when I should have. I was just happy for her. Happy that she had found something she was genuinely passionate about. In some twisted way, I thought that if she succeeded, maybe things between us would improve. But looking back, it's clear I was walking around with blinders on. The signs were all there, and I ignored every single one, even as things between us kept unraveling. And then there was her family. They were a completely different ballgame. Her parents were the classic old-school type, conservative, church every Sunday, the kind who looked down on anything remotely worldly. They weren't thrilled about their daughter plastering herself all over social media for strangers to gawk at, but she didn't care. In fact, she never cared what anyone thought, least of all them. Now her sister? She was the polar opposite of my wife. Where my wife was loud, headstrong, and full of fire, her sister was calm and steady, much more like me. If my wife was a firecracker, her sister was the steady flame of a candle, quiet, reliable, and never one to make a fuss. She didn't buy into the whole Instagram scene, and she sure as hell wasn't into the wild, self-obsessed lifestyle my wife had begun to embrace. Sometimes I found myself wondering how they were even related. They couldn't have been more different. The real red flags started popping up when she began posting swimsuit pictures. Now, I get it. People post vacation pics in bikinis, no big deal. But this wasn't casual. She went out of her way to arrange these professional photo shoots, all done up like she was auditioning for some sort of magazine cover. It wasn't just fun and games, it was calculated. And it made me uneasy, but I kept my mouth shut. After all, it was her body, her Instagram page. I thought it was harmless at first. But then, things got weird. I started seeing expensive items around the house, things we definitely hadn't discussed. I'm not talking about small stuff. I mean high-end furniture, designer bags, clothes that cost a small fortune. At first, I figured maybe she was dipping into our savings or using whatever money she was making off her Instagram. But when I asked her about it, she just brushed it off, saying it was all from her influencer work. Now, I'm not an idiot. I understand how these things work, and there's no way she was getting enough sponsorships to afford all of this. So, where was the money coming from? I decided to do a little investigating of my own. I combed through her Instagram, checked every post, every caption, looking for signs of ads or sponsorships that might explain the sudden flow of cash. But guess what? I found absolutely nothing. No ads, no partnerships, no answers. That's when it really hit me. Something wasn't right. Not even close. I had more questions than I could handle, and the worst part? I had no clue how to approach her without her blowing up at me. I couldn't solve it alone. No matter how many times I tried to piece it together, nothing added up. Where was this money coming from? What was she really up to? I couldn't trust my own instincts at that point, and I had no idea how to confront her without her flipping the script and making me the bad guy. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I hired a private investigator. Now, before you start thinking this was some noir movie cliché, let me tell you, private detectives aren't cheap, and they don't work out of smoke-filled offices in the back alleys. It's a real business, and it costs a lot more than I'd imagined. But by then, I didn't care about the price. I needed answers. Answers I couldn't get on my own. I had to know what was happening with my wife, where the money was coming from, and if there was something far darker behind her sudden success. I'll admit, I felt uneasy about it, like maybe I was crossing a line. But I convinced myself that if she had nothing to hide, I had nothing to worry about. That's how I justified it anyway. The investigator didn't ask too many questions, he just got straight to the point. He promised to look into her activities, track her meetings, and dig into any transactions that didn't make sense. Meanwhile, I thought about turning to someone else, her sister. I hadn't confided in her before, but given her calm, rational demeanor, I figured she might know something or at least offer some advice. So, one evening, I decided to visit her. I didn't want to seem suspicious, so I played it off as a casual drop-by. Just the brother-in-law stopping in for a chat. When I arrived, it was just her at home. The place was quiet, and she seemed genuinely surprised to see me. We ended up sitting in her living room, sharing a bottle of wine. There's something about her presence that's soothing, like she could make everything feel all right, even when it was clearly falling apart. We didn't dive into the heavy stuff right away, just small talk at first. But eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her how worried I was. I explained how my wife had been acting strange, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really, really wrong. I tried to keep my voice steady, but she could tell I was coming unglued. I was terrified that my wife had gotten tangled up with the wrong crowd or was hiding something dangerous. Maybe I was paranoid, but after everything that had been happening, I couldn't afford to dismiss the idea entirely. Her sister listened quietly, her face serious but not surprised. When I asked if she knew anything at all, she simply shook her head. She said my wife hadn't mentioned anything odd and didn't really open up about personal issues. They weren't as close as they used to be, not like when they were kids. Still, she assured me that if she ever noticed something off, she'd tell me right away. It was frustrating. I walked out of that conversation with no more answers than I had when I went in, but at least it felt like someone was in my corner. Her sister was always like that, calm, grounded, the kind of person who kept it together when everything around her was going to hell. But even with her reassurances, that gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the sense that something huge, something awful, was looming just ahead, waiting to blindside me. When the detective finally called me back for a meeting, I wasn't sure what to expect, but the pit in my stomach told me it wouldn't be good. The whole drive over, I had this nagging feeling that whatever he'd found was going to turn my world upside down. And the moment I stepped into his office and saw the serious look on his face, no small talk, no pleasantries, I knew I was right. He didn't waste any time. Sat me down, pulled out a folder, and laid it all out. Your wife's Instagram? That's just the surface, he said, and my stomach dropped. I kept quiet, needing to hear it all. It's a cover, a front for her real source of income. You've probably heard of the site. Then he said the name, and it felt like someone sucker punched me. I'm not going to repeat it here, but you know the kind. Those notorious websites where women post raunchy pictures and videos for cash. The kind of content that leaves very little to the imagination. I just sat there, stunned, not fully comprehending what he was saying. My wife was on a site like that? The same woman who told me she was working hard on her Instagram career, hustling to become some kind of influencer, was secretly making money from that? The detective kept going, pulling out receipts, so to speak. Screenshots of her profile on the site, payment records tied directly to her bank account, detailed schedules of her photo shoots, everything. And these weren't your run-of-the-mill Instagram selfies. No, these were professional, steamy shots, way more explicit than anything she'd ever put on her public account. Stuff I never imagined she'd be okay with, let alone willing to sell to strangers. I flipped through the documents slowly, my heart pounding. The detective sat back, silent, giving me time to process it all. The longer I looked, the more the reality sank in. She had built this entire second life, this secret career, right under my nose, and I had no clue. Sure, she'd mentioned doing photo shoots and working hard on her content, but I assumed it was all for Instagram, part of the whole influencer game. But this wasn't about curated fashion shots or travel photos for brand deals. This was men paying her for exclusive, provocative images. I looked at the transaction history, thousands of dollars flowing into her account from that site. It explained everything: the expensive furniture, the designer clothes, all those luxury items that seemed to appear out of nowhere. It wasn't from Instagram sponsorships. It was from this. I didn't know what to feel. Rage? Betrayal? Shame? It all hit me like a freight train. Maybe some guys could shrug it off, convince themselves it wasn't a big deal because, technically, it wasn't cheating. But that's not me. To me, this was a betrayal, plain and simple. Not just because of what she was doing, but because of the lies, the secrecy, the fact that she was selling herself to strangers online without even having a conversation with me about it. I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was the fool in the background, completely oblivious while she put herself on display for God knows how many men. The detective leaned forward, snapping me out of my thoughts. "I'm sorry," he said, not like it was his fault, but because he could see how much this had rocked me. "I know this is tough to hear." I nodded, still numb. I should have seen it. I mumbled, mostly to myself. All those times she went to photo shoots, all the late nights she came home with new clothes or bags, telling me it was just part of her job. How did I not put it together? "We all miss things," the detective offered, trying to be sympathetic. "Sometimes people are just really good at hiding who they are." His words echoed in my head as I sat there, grappling with the overwhelming weight of it all. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she talk to me about what she was doing? Maybe she thought I'd lose it. Maybe she was scared of how I'd react. But still, she owed me at least some honesty. I kept wondering if things would have been different if we just communicated, if she hadn't hidden it all from me. Maybe we'd have worked something out. Or maybe we would have split up sooner, and I wouldn't be sitting here in this detective's office, watching my life unravel. I thought back to all those little changes I had noticed, the skimpier outfits, the expensive clothes, the sudden uptick in photo shoots. Now that I knew the truth, it was all crystal clear. Those weren't just innocent Instagram pics. They were carefully staged for paying customers on that other site. Everything, from the angles to the outfits, had been designed for a much more private audience. I took the folder from the detective, but I could barely bring myself to flip through it. Inside were photos, transaction records, even messages between her and random men. Men who were paying for the kind of content I didn't even know she was making. Every piece of proof was right there, staring back at me, and I had no idea how to process any of it. I walked out of that office with more answers than I ever wanted, but at least now I knew what I was up against. I knew what she'd been doing behind my back, what she had turned into. But as for what to do next, I didn't have the slightest clue. With that folder full of evidence in my hands, I didn't know where to turn. My head was spinning, my stomach churning. There was no way I could confront her. Not yet, not with everything rattling around in my brain like that. I needed to talk to someone who knew her but wasn't caught up in her lies. The only person I could think of was her sister. So, I drove to her place. No phone call, no warning. Just me showing up at her door with a storm of emotions I wasn't sure how to explain. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she immediately knew something was wrong. Her eyes were full of concern, like she was bracing herself for whatever bad news I was about to drop. "Come in," she said softly, and I stepped inside, the weight of that folder heavy in my hands. We sat down in the same living room where we'd talked before. Only this time, I wasn't there for advice. I was there to unload something far worse. I couldn't hold back. I spilled everything: the detective, the website, the money, the photos. She sat there, frozen, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her expression shifted slowly, from shock to something that looked like a mix of disgust and confusion. I opened the folder and laid out some of the evidence in front of her. The photos, the transactions, the schedules. She stared at them for a long time, then pushed them away like they were burning her fingers. I had no idea," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't believe she's doing this. I don't know what to do," I admitted, the weight of everything finally crashing down on me. I couldn't think straight. My whole world had been upended, and I didn't have the first clue what my next move should be. I never saw this coming. She got up, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed a bottle of wine from the counter. "Here," she said, pouring us both a glass. "You need this." I took the glass, thankful for anything that could dull the edge of my reality. She sat back down, but I could see she was trying to steer the conversation away from the mess her sister had created. She didn't want to linger on it, so she asked about work, about anything other than the disaster that was consuming my life. And honestly, I was grateful for the distraction. For just a few minutes, it almost felt normal again, like I wasn't drowning in this nightmare. But, of course, it was only temporary. No amount of small talk or wine could erase the mess I was facing. Still, I appreciated her being there. She didn't judge me, didn't make me feel stupid for missing the signs. She just listened, and for that, I was grateful in ways I couldn't put into words. When it was finally time to leave, I felt a strange sense of calm, like I wasn't so alone in all of this. As I went to say goodbye, I hugged her. It was supposed to be just a simple hug, nothing more than a gesture of thanks, of comfort. But when she hugged me back, it wasn't just friendly. She held on to me, tight, like she didn't want to let go. And I'm not going to lie, there was something about the way she hugged me that made me feel warm. It was the first time in days that I didn't feel like I was falling apart. It was comforting, sure, but not in the way a family hug should feel. There was something different about it. It lingered too long, longer than it should have. Friendly hugs don't last that long, do they? At the time, I convinced myself it was just two people in a tough situation, trying to support each other. But the way her body pressed into mine, the way her breathing slowed against my shoulder, it wasn't the kind of hug you give to a brother-in-law. I didn't fully process it in that moment, or maybe I didn't want to. But one thing was clear. That hug was the beginning of something I wasn't ready to admit. 2 days later, the dinner I had been dreading finally arrived. It had been on the calendar for weeks. A family gathering at our place with her parents, her sister, and of course my wife. The absolute last thing I wanted was to sit around a table pretending like nothing was wrong. But I decided to wait until then to reveal what I knew. If I was going to blow everything up, I figured I might as well make it dramatic. That morning, I still hadn't decided exactly how I was going to handle it. Part of me thought about pulling her aside and confronting her privately, getting it over with. But then I thought, why should I make it easy for her? She had been hiding this from me for months, maybe longer, and her family, especially her conservative religious parents, deserved to know who their daughter had really become. Dinner was tense, at least for me. Everyone else seemed relaxed, chatting away like it was any other night. Her parents were their usual selves, her dad making polite conversation about work, her mom asking about our lives like we were still the perfect couple. And my wife? She acted like nothing was wrong, laughing and smiling, pretending as though her world wasn't about to come crashing down. About halfway through dinner, just after her sister made a comment about how proud she was of my wife's successful career, I decided it was time. I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. I began, trying to sound as casual as possible. It's really impressive how well she's done for herself lately. Quite the accomplishment. I glanced at my wife, and I could see her smile falter, just slightly, as she picked up on something being off. In fact, I continued, her career has taken quite the unexpected direction. Her parents looked at me with curiosity, still completely unaware, while her sister shot me a cautious glance, probably remembering our conversation from a few days ago. Balancing her social media presence with her other ventures has been quite something, I said, letting the words hang in the air long enough for the discomfort to build. My wife's face turned pale. And since we're all here, I thought now would be a good time to show you exactly what she's been up to. I pulled out my phone, opened the browser, and went straight to her profile on that site. The one where she'd been posting the real content, the one that was actually making her money. I turned the screen toward her parents and let them see the truth for themselves. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Her mom's face morphed from confusion to outright horror in a matter of seconds. Her dad opened his mouth, but no words came out, just disbelief. He just stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. And then, as expected, everything erupted. Her mom started yelling, demanding to know how she could do something like this, asking what kind of life she had been leading behind their backs. Her dad tried to stay calm, but his voice quickly escalated, disbelief giving way to pure anger. As for my wife, she looked like she might pass out. She stammered out excuses, trying to justify herself, but nothing stuck. She was caught, and there was no talking her way out of it this time. Her sister remained quiet, her eyes darting between me and the chaos at the table, unsure whose side to take. As the shouting got louder, I stood up, calmly taking off my jacket. I had done what I came to do. I didn't need to stick around for the fallout. They could fight amongst themselves without me. I'm going to head out, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos for a moment. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. The cool evening air hit me as I stepped outside, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of relief. The echoes of their shouting faded behind me as I left, and I wasn't angry anymore, just drained. I headed to a nearby bar, the one I used to frequent with friends before everything got so damn complicated. I took a seat, ordered a drink, and let the noise of the place drown out the insanity I just walked away from. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. About 20 minutes into my second drink, just as the alcohol was starting to dull the edge of what I'd unleashed, she walked in. My wife's sister. I wasn't expecting to see her, but when she slid onto the stool next to me, it felt natural, like she belonged there in that moment. She didn't say anything right away. She just sat there, ordered a drink. I'll have what he's having, she said softly, her voice steady but quiet. I looked at her, and our eyes met, lingering longer than usual. There was something there, something unspoken, but we both felt it. A mutual understanding of the mess we were now tangled in, the wreckage that lay ahead. We made small talk at first, pretending like the elephant in the room wasn't there. She asked me about work, about how I was holding up, but there was an undertone to her words, like we both knew this conversation was just a distraction. I answered her questions, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept looking at her, realizing just how different she was from her sister. She was calm, composed, grounded, everything my wife wasn't. And in that moment, I couldn't help but notice just how much I appreciated those qualities. As we sat there, drink after drink, it became obvious that this wasn't just a casual conversation between in-laws. Something deeper was brewing, something I hadn't expected but couldn't deny. The more we talked, the more I began to relax. The tension I had been carrying around for so long, the stress from the lies, the crumbling marriage, seemed to melt away with every word she spoke. And then, somewhere in the middle of the night, she reached over and gently took my hand. Her touch was soft, but there was an intention behind it, something that sent a jolt through me. "Do you want to go for a walk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but the weight behind her words was unmistakable. I hesitated for just a second, but I knew my answer even before I spoke. "Yeah, let's go." We stepped out into the cool night, and the city felt quieter, almost like it was holding its breath. We walked side by side, not saying much at first, letting the calm of the night settle over us. But after a few minutes, we started to open up. She told me how hard it had been watching me and her sister fall apart, how she had seen the distance growing between us long before I had noticed it myself. She didn't judge, didn't point fingers, she was just honest. And that kind of honesty, I hadn't had that in a long time, and it meant more to me than I could say. As we walked, I realized how different I felt around her. There was no tension, no edge, no waiting for the next argument or lie. I felt alive. It was like I'd shed years of frustration and heaviness just by being with her. It had been so long since I'd felt this light, this free, not with my wife, not with anyone. Before I knew it, we were standing in front of her place. The walk had flown by, and suddenly there we were, at her door. "Do you want to come in?" she asked, her voice soft, inviting but with a hint of vulnerability. I didn't hesitate. I didn't even need to think about it. Yeah, I said, following her inside. Her place was quiet, peaceful, with an energy I hadn't felt in my own home for longer than I cared to admit. She uncorked a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion, and we sat down on her couch, talking about everything and nothing all at once. The tension between us hadn't gone away. It had only grown stronger, humming in the air, undeniable now. At some point, I don't even remember exactly when, the conversation just stopped. We were sitting there, looking at each other, and then we kissed. It wasn't slow or cautious. It was raw, electric, the kind of kiss that makes everything else disappear. In that moment, everything felt right, like I'd finally found something real, something I hadn't even realized I was missing. The rest of the night was intense, but it wasn't just about the physical connection, though that was definitely there. It was more than that. It was like all the emotions I'd been bottling up, anger, loneliness, frustration, finally had somewhere to go. Being with her made me feel things I hadn't felt in years, and for once, I didn't want it to stop. I stayed the night, and when I woke up the next morning, I didn't feel any regret. Not even a little. This wasn't about revenge, about getting even with my wife for all the lies and betrayal. It was about something new, something real. And in that moment, I realized I didn't owe my wife anything anymore. She had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. When I finally got home, my wife was waiting for me, standing in the doorway like she had been there all night. The moment I walked through the door, she slapped me hard. The sting of it echoed across my face, but it didn't hurt nearly as much as everything else that had led to this moment. She was furious, and I could see it in her eyes, the anger, the hurt. But I didn't flinch. That slap? It was nothing compared to the betrayal I had endured. Nothing compared to the lies she had built our life around. I stood there, looking at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sorry. All I felt was relief. "You're a fool," she hissed, her eyes burning with fury. "You think I didn't know where you were? You think I care? I'm filing for divorce." I didn't even blink. In fact, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. She had just saved me the hassle of being the one to bring it up. "Good," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "That's probably the smartest thing you've said in a long time." The divorce was swift, mercifully so. No drawn-out legal battles, no fights over who got what. We both knew it was over, and neither of us had the energy to drag it out any longer than necessary. 2 months later, her sister and I decided it was time to be honest with her parents. We expected anger, maybe judgment, or even outright disgust. But to our surprise, they were understanding, supportive even, happy for us in a way that I hadn't been prepared for. Maybe they saw what we hadn't realized ourselves, that we were building something positive from the ruins of the past. As conservative as they were, my ex-wife's parents somehow managed to see past the mess and recognize that we were creating something good, something real. As for my ex, she dove headfirst into her social media life, more focused than ever. Without me around to weigh her down with judgment or opinions, she was free to be whoever she wanted. And, truth be told, she thrived. Her follower count skyrocketed, her content attracted more attention than ever, and it seemed like she was living her best life. No longer tied to the expectations of being a wife, she embraced the world she had been building online. And me? I was fine with it. I didn't care anymore. I had moved on to something real, something that made me feel alive again. I had no reason to look back. Update: it's been 2.5 years since the chaos went down, and I figured it was time to give an update. Life has changed in ways I never could have predicted. First off, yes, we got married. My wife's sister, well, technically ex-wife's sister, but that feels strange to say now, and I tied the knot about a year ago. It wasn't anything big or flashy, just a small wedding with close family and friends. And honestly, that's exactly what I wanted. After all the drama from the past, something simple and intimate felt like the right way to start this new chapter. And the bigger news? We're expecting. Yep, we got a baby on the way. Sometimes I still can't believe it. It's funny how life works. If someone had told me back when all the drama started that I'd be starting a family with her, I would have thought they were out of their mind. But here we are, getting ready to welcome a child, and I couldn't be happier. Life since then? It's been good. Not just good, really good. We've built a stable, peaceful life together. No more lies, no more secrets. Just the two of us, working through whatever life throws at us side by side. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted, a life that feels genuine, free of the chaos I used to live in. As for my ex, from what I've heard, she's still doing well with her social media career. She's living her life, and as far as I know, she's happy. We don't talk, and there's no need for that anymore. We've both moved on, and that's that. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who's followed along with my story. It's been one hell of a ride, but I'm grateful for where it's led me. If there's anything I've learned from all this, it's that life has a funny way of falling into place, even when it feels completely shattered. So to anyone out there dealing with their own messes, keep pushing through. You never know where life will take you. Thanks for the support, and take care of yourselves.